Is patriotism a good thing? Today in Australia, on the 26th of January, is Australia Day. It's the day that we commemorate the raising of the British flag on Australian soil on January the 26th, 1788, in Sydney Cove within Botany Bay. The British Empire needed a new place to dump its convicts, having lost the American colonies a couple of years earlier. And I guess Australia drew the short straw. I don't know, won the lottery. I guess you can look at it in various ways. Anyway, since I think the mid 19th century, Australia Day was sort of recognised as some kind of national day here. It became more official during the 20th century, I think in the 1930s or thereabouts, when it became a holiday across the nation on that particular day. But from the beginning of Australia Day, there have also been critics or doubters, if you like. Particularly initially amongst the Indigenous Australians, there was a small group of people, even way back in the 1930s, who considered Australia Day rather to be Invasion Day. This was the day that they associated with the loss of their land, with the invasion by these Europeans who simply marched in and took over what they considered to be terra nullius, the no man's land of Australia. And that sentiment, that anti-Australia Day sentiment, has grown in the last two or three decades amongst Indigenous Australians, and it's also gained some ground amongst non-Indigenous Australians as well. Some people would argue that it's inappropriate to celebrate Australia's National Day on a day that's potentially so divisive, on a day that brings back so many bad memories for the Indigenous population in Australia. Perhaps we should choose another day instead. In response to that growing sentiment, one of our large retailers, a supermarket chain here in Australia, decided that this year they wouldn't offer any special Australia Day products for sale. I mean, they still sell, Australian flags and a few things like that amongst their normal products, but they wouldn't be putting on any extra effort to sell this material or to display this material. Of course, that immediately got a reaction from the conservative right, who saw this as undermining our culture in some way. And I think the day after this announcement was made, some of these supermarkets were vandalised with graffiti and so on. Well, this got me thinking, as all these occasions do, about the concept of patriotism. Is patriotism a good thing? Love of country, love of fatherland, in fact. I understand the desire to protect the place where you live. Look, Australia is a beautiful and diverse country geographically and in terms of its climate. We've done an okay job with our government, I think. It's got its flaws, obviously, based on the British parliamentary system. It's far from perfect. There are many issues in Australian lifestyle that you might want to question, or parts of our history that you might want to question. Nevertheless, I think Australia is a pretty good place to live for most of us. If Australia was actually invaded by a hostile force, I guess I would feel some urge to defend our country from such an invasion, perhaps to defend my family in particular. So I understand that. Do I think that I need to support Australia when it invades other countries overseas? Do I think I should be proud of Australia for participating in an invasion of Turkey in 1915 in the First World War? Do I think I should be proud of Australia for participating in a conflict in Vietnam or Afghanistan? I'm not so sure about those things. But I'm very wary of any form of patriotism that borders on devotion and or fanaticism. I'm not sure where the line is drawn between those three things, in fact: patriotism, devotion, fanaticism. I'm very uncomfortable with any kind of devotion that's offered toward anyone or anything because I don't think anyone or anything actually deserves that kind of devotion, let alone fanatical devotion, if there is in fact a difference between those things. When I see an Australian flag flying in someone's garden, particularly when it's not Australia Day, I feel very uncomfortable indeed. What are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to say about themselves and me? Are they trying to say that they're somehow more Australian than I am because I don't fly an Australian flag in my garden? Again, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It disturbs me and frightens me a little when I see in someone's eyes or hear in someone's voice that kind of devotion or fanaticism. It's okay when it's directed towards a football team, but the nation as a whole, I think the problem with such devotion is that it makes you blind to the faults of the object of your devotion. No object is worth that devotion, no person is worth that devotion, because it hides the flaws in that object or person. Indeed, it prevents anyone from even hearing criticisms or tolerating criticisms of the object of devotion. I think it's okay to love your country and take pride in your country as long as that doesn't close your eyes to potential faults and potential criticism. There's a lot that's wrong with Australia. We have political problems. We've dealt terribly with our Indigenous population. We're lagging right behind on climate change issues, even though we have the potential to do great things. Some of our economic problems are really serious, and I think we're not dealing with them very well. We have huge issues. I think some of our involvement in overseas conflicts has been a disaster and should never have happened. I think Australians should always be prepared to criticise and critique the country in which they live. Otherwise, such devotion is meaningless. So I guess I kind of pull back from those events, from those occasions when we celebrate the nation, when we're supposed to feel patriotic. I pull back from those, I withdraw from those because I don't want to be seen to be devoted, to be fanatical. I will give qualified support to my nation in its efforts to improve society. I will give qualified support to my nation in its efforts overseas, but qualified.